Hello, as everyone is joining. Thank you for coming today and spending your time with us at this session of the Rare Advocacy Exchange. I am not Daniel DeFebio, who I know many of you have come to expect to see today, so I will be standing in. But as we wait for others to join, I just wanted to say welcome. I don't know that we have a fun icebreaker like we did before, so we'll just have to have you maybe put in the chat hello. In the past, Daniel's asked everyone to share, who they are and what disease they represent, and maybe even like where you're calling in from today. So as we just wait for people to join, we're excited to have you, and we're going to get going here in a quick second. Hello, Connecticut. Excellent. All right. So as people are joining again, my name is Nicole Boyce. I am the founder and chief mission officer of Global Genes. And so I've had the good fortune over the years to meet and get to sit with a lot of you at several of our events over the past several years, almost 2 decades. And it's just really amazing to see how this whole entire rare ecosystem has evolved, has just grown, and is just accelerating so many of the important things that we all need to tackle here. One of the things that got us really excited about this Rare Advocacy Exchange this year, while it's not in person and nothing will beat that, we wanted to ensure that the content and that the topics were really, really relevant to your day to day, so that that you made joining us a priority. And we're so grateful because we think that's been happening over the last several months as we have embarked on the exchange. The theme that we've been trying to pull through has been focused on navigating leadership, right? Who you are as a leader, regardless of how you got here, you're here. And how can we help each other be the best versions of ourselves, and therefore, build the best organizations, collaborations, and really do it with some of these tools. One of the things that we're going to be talking about today, which, we were saying earlier, is such an important topic, and I know that we've all faced it over the years, is conflict and competition, and how, a lot of people say it's really so much harder to collaborate, but you get further faster when you do. And we know it's really hard, and it's something that often comes from places of commitment to those that we're supporting in rare disease and wanting to create legacy. And there's so much that's personal for us as we all come into this world and these leadership roles by building and participating with organizations. But I think what we're seeing now is that sometimes we have to kind of set that aside and really focus on the bigger picture, and what is it that we can do as leaders that can help support the growth and the success of the work that these organizations are doing and those around us, because the rising tide lifts all boats, and the more that we are successful ourselves and share that, the more we as an ecosystem can be successful. So thank you for coming again. Welcome, everyone. Without further ado, I'd like to, you will be hearing from our speakers, and they'll be formally introduced in a second. But thank you to Emily, Chandler, Payal, and Sarah. We're super excited that you're here. I think you can go to the next slide because we just talked about kind of our series. You will note that, if you can go back to that slide, please, you'll note that there are several more sessions in the Rare Advocacy Exchange through October. But today, obviously, we're focused on this conflict and competition. If you can go to the next slide now, please. And we'd also like to, there's so much appreciation for the sponsors that allow us to make all this available to you. And so we're very appreciative. In that vein, we have a special guest today, Stacy Beal, who's representing Pfizer. And when we were speaking about the importance of this topic, it was something that just really resonated with her and with their organization because of some of the past experiences that they had. And so we thought it would be very relevant to have Stacy kind of kick off this session and just share a few really important points that I thought would be helpful for us to all hear. So Stacy, thank you for joining, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Nicole. And to the Global Genes team, thank you sincerely for the chance for us to participate in today's Rare Advocacy Exchange session. As you mentioned, is something that is very near and dear to my heart, as well as something we're trying to solve within Pfizer as a stakeholder within the biopharma industry. So it's truly inspiring to witness the acknowledgement of these shared efforts in making the difference in patients' lives. And in the current healthcare landscape, which is evolving at a very rapid pace, as we all know, it's imperative that we collectively amplify the voices of patients, especially those living with a rare condition. Their experiences, their challenges, and insights are essential in shaping our approach and driving meaningful change, regardless of the waves of our external environment. We have to do it, right? So our shared ecosystem thrives on unity, and even at Pfizer, as big as we are, we acknowledge that this is a necessity. By working collaboratively across all of the stakeholders, including advocacy groups, patients and caregivers, advocates, healthcare professionals, health systems, and industry partners, we can really ensure that the needs and perspectives of the patients remain at the forefront of our initiatives, and so that we can develop innovative solutions that truly address the unique challenges faced by individuals living with rare diseases. So we as biopharma recognize that the need to partner extends far beyond educating on the disease alone. It involves creating a collaborative environment where all stakeholders can come together, like we're doing here today, to share our experiences and work towards common goals. Elevating the patient's voice requires actively listening to the patient's experiences, understanding their needs, and integrating their feedback into our strategies. This approach not only empowers patients, but also enhances the effectiveness of all of our efforts. I was reflecting on today's theme, leadership, from conflict and competition to cooperation and collaboration. And I thought I'd share two short examples of how our Pfizer rare disease patient engagement team is currently taking this approach. So the first I'll share is occurring right within the community itself, and specifically within the sickle cell community. For those of you who don't already know, while sickle cell has been known of for thousands of years, it was first formally described in the medical literature in 1910, highlighting a 20-year-old student from Granada who was severely anemic and experiencing pain episodes. But it wasn't until 1957 that the cause of sickle cell was determined by a doctor out of England, actually. And despite progress made in the way of research and treatment, bringing in much needed support from the biopharma industry, the first treatment identified was not until 1998. And unfortunately, for various reasons, there are still very limited treatment options currently available even 27 years later. So that's kind of the backdrop, and understanding that it's been the sickle cell community-based organizations that have ensured a spotlight remains on sickle cell disease and has done the vast majority of the education and community support that's been needed. But it's been at the very grassroots level, as I mentioned. So after having acquired GBT, a company who is solely dedicated to advancing the sickle cell treatment landscape, we at Pfizer chose to stand up our very first community-facing team, and that was solely dedicated to support the sickle cell community and their patients. Now, what is unique or not in some others, but in sickle cell, this space, it has over 150 advocacy organizations whose mission is to support sickle cell patients in varying degrees. So most of these grassroots groups, many of them struggle with sustainable funding, like many other groups do. They're all doing incredible work in service of patients, but we recognize that there's a real need to support the convening of these CBOs in order to be more efficient and increase their capacity. So our sickle cell patient affairs liaisons, affectionately known as PALs in our world, diligently work with those CBO leaders to identify their priorities, their needs and gaps, and then seek to bring together the organizations at a regional level to discuss how they can become more effectively working together and leverage one another's expertise instead of, Nicole, to your point, working in silos. One of our sickle cell pals in North Carolina, for example, has been serving as a convener since having come onto the team and helped to create a mid-Atlantic based coalition of CBOs where they now meet regularly and coordinate events and leverage one another's unique strengths and even their reach. It's truly impressive to see how much more they are able to do together versus going it alone. And this approach has helped us at Pfizer build trust with the community, something that has been damaged in the past by biopharma and especially within sickle cell. The last example I'll share is in another way that we're fostering a collaborative approach with the community is ensuring that we have a consistent and visible seat at the table, or that advocacy groups do, when we're considering any new plan or resource rollout. And this approach was a request of the community itself when Pfizer acquired GPT, and we listened. Since the Sickle Cell PAL team's inception about a year and a half ago, we've stood up several community-based advisory groups who we meet with monthly, and sometimes more often than that, really. We've gained invaluable inputs from them on resource needs and approaches. Even the creation of our sickle cell team itself was not done without their awareness and input. And we're constantly pressure testing assumptions that we as an industry, I will admit, often fall victim to. And I'll be honest, we are slightly off the mark at times on our approach. And these fearless and passionate CBO leaders help keep us in track and on track. This approach has ensured that the voice of the patient is included in all of what we do. And we are so grateful for their honesty and their trust. I'm sure that neither of these approaches are unique to Pfizer alone, but I can say that the key to success of this approach is the consistency in which we do it and resisting the urge to go it alone, if you will, even when it is not, that time is not on our side. These examples underscore a commitment to come alongside the advocacy and patient community in all that we do and demonstrate the positive impact that collaboration can have on patient outcomes. So by amplifying the patient's voice across every stakeholder, just in close, we can ensure that their experiences are valued and needs are addressed. So I just invite each of you today who are listening in and who are going to be participating in these sessions to bring forward ideas and ways we can partner for all of us to consider and help create a more inclusive ecosystem that is truly patient-centric. I hope you all enjoy the session, and I will pass it off to Global Genes.
That's great. Thank you so much, Stacy. Thank you for kicking us off in that way. I think there's no better way for us to start this really important conversation. So thank you for being here and doing that. I just want to do a few housekeeping things. My name is Lauren Alford, and I'm the Senior Director of Community Engagement and Communications at Global Genes. And a few things, Kat, if you can share the slide, we've got a few tips for you as we go through today. We've got several engaging opportunities for you. One is live polling. We'll have a poll question that will show at the beginning that Sarah's going to talk us through, and we want to hear your thoughts on that. There's opportunities to talk in this. That's one of the meaningful things that we wanted to include in our virtual exchange series. So you can submit your questions to the panelists through the chat or the Q&A feature, and we will get to them at the end. There's also an exciting way that you can continue that conversation. If your question doesn't get answered in this larger group, we're going to have breakout rooms. So small groups where we can continue the discussion, and we'll show you there's different themes. There will be 4 of them, one with each of our speakers, and you can keep talking. We'll be recording this entire thing. We know that not everybody can come at one time, and so look out for that after we are done today. We will send the recording pretty quickly out after. And we want to hear how this went for you. Did it help you? What are the future educational needs that you think you have? What impact did this have on you? So we want to hear your thoughts on today's session, and we will be sending out a post-session survey. And then, of course, we want to share. So if you learned something, if you want to take a screenshot of your friends here, if you want to share your favorite quote, please do on social media. And these are the hashtags that you can use. So without further ado, just really excited to announce this amazing panel that we have today with Emily Amerson from CTNN B1 Connect and Cure, Chandler Cruz from the Chandler Project, and then we have two amazing moms, and one of them happens to be an author, Payal Patel, and then Sarah Shaffer. So thanks so much for being with us, and Sarah, I'll let you take it over.
Like, this is so amazing. And thank you so much, Lauren. And I'm so excited to be here. And, you know, when my youngest was diagnosed with malignant infantile osteopetrosis, at that time it was 1 in 500,000. Now we're running probably about 1 in 250,000, still very rare. And we had nowhere to go. It's a blood disorder. So we were lumped in with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society to provide us with whatever support we could find. And, you know, it is just amazing to see this collaboration. And when you are looking for that needle in the haystack, just that same vote theory, you know, these are the most amazing places that we can find them. You know, so one of the things, you know, when we started our foundation, it was because there was nobody there. And then we started to develop and find out that there's different levels of the disease, different levels of support and timing. So I'm just kind of curious out there. You know, how many organizations are you aware of for your particular disease? Is it 0, which is A, B is 1, 2 to 3, 3 to 5, or 6 or more? It's kind of where I thought, though. You know, the 1, 2, 3, not many. So, you know, as we're kind of thinking about this, it's, you know, it's important to understand, you know, clearly what our goals are and where you want to go with your foundation and your disease advocacy. And here we're seeing what it's about, you know, the main ones are 1 and 2 to 3. So not a whole bunch. And that collaboration, you know, we become very possessive of our diseases. We become very territorial, if you will. And because it's so personal, it is so extremely personal to all of us. And, you know, as we go on and we talk about things, you know, we will dive into making sure we know what our goals are, what the end goal is. Because a lot of times we need to realign, you know, why we're doing this and what our advocacy is going for. And so, you know, when you start to bounce ideas off of everybody and really get that collaboration, and when we get the mindset that we're not competing against, we're building together, is really a big, you know, shift. And it's hard for us to accept because we're like, well, we only won. This is mine. I got this. And it's just, and it's these conversations that we get all of these ideas out, because sometimes we may just be standing in our own way. You know, we're gung-ho on one thing and we're not even able to see outside. And when we start to just talk about it and have these really open and honest conversations, that's where the beauty begins. So, you know, I hope that you guys get as much as you can out of this. Certainly, we're all resources to you and really looking to support and collaborate with efforts on whatever level it is. You know, when I met Nicole back in, oh gosh, 2012, I think was my first year at Global Genes. So it's been a long time. And when you talk grassroots, it's grassroots. And that's where we kind of all are. You got to be gritty. You got to be scrappy and kind of do what you do best. And that's really advocate for yourself and your disease, whether it's your child, your parent, your loved one, whoever it is. If you're that voice and you're wanting to be that power, we're going to help you kind of deviate and find a way. So I am Sarah Shaffer. I am the founder of the Mason Shaffer Foundation. As I said, it was malignant infantile osteopetrosis, and it was cured with a cord blood transplant and donated umbilical cord stem cells. So I kind of shifted my efforts and went to cord blood as my go-to advocacy. And there are lots of ins and outs that went with that, partnering with pharma companies that then since decided not to, and bouncing and finding where we belonged. And it's an amazing journey. And I have been a social worker for 25 years. I wrote my first book called The Dumpster Fire Diaries, which is all inclusive of the rare disease journey. So, it's amazing. And we've got Emily.
Yeah, hi, Sarah. Thanks for passing it over to me. I'm Emily Amerson. I have a daughter who's affected by CT and NB1 syndrome. And I kind of came in, you'll hear more of my story later, but I kind of came in when we were kind of building something together from something that was fragmented. But yeah, CT and NB1 syndrome is a rare neurodevelopmental disorder. And so we've got a pretty small community, but we're spread out. So it's important that we're aligned and moving forward together.
Great. Payal.
Hi, I'm Payal Patel. I also have a daughter, Reina, who is 11 and has DLG4 Shine. I'm also a mom, but I'm also one of the leaders on our newly merged foundation, DLG4 Shine Foundation. I was originally one of those parents that, broke off from the original foundation and started my own and realized that it was a really bad idea and it was dividing the community. So you'll hear more about that as we talk through some of these scenarios, but we have now worked really hard to become one organization, and we're working well because we're only a population of less than 200.
Excellent. Ms. Chandler.
Hi, I'm Chandler, but before I say more, I am not a mother. I am a rare advocate, rare individual living with achondroplasia. But before I continue, I just want to say happy early Mother's Day to you three being rare moms. And, I know like my mom, when I was born, she did, just put her all in, doing anything and everything she could for me and, figuring out about my diagnosis and whatnot. So it just like occurred to me as you were introducing yourselves. I was like, I'm not a parent, on this board, but wanted to quickly say happy Mother's Day to you three and also all the other moms here today. But like I said, I'm Chandler. I was born with the most common form of dwarfism or skeletal dysplasia, which is called achondroplasia. It happens in about 1 in 25 to 30,000 births, and I started my own patient advocacy group, the Chandler Project, in 2018, and it supports, awareness surrounding new research and developments for treatment options for those with achondroplasia and now other similar conditions, such as one called hypochondroplasia. And so I'm just really excited to be here today. There are other organizations within my community, and so this topic is definitely, it's very fitting now given the circumstances of research and everything surrounding our condition. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. What we kind of wanted to do in this format is really kind of dive in with the panelists, myself and Emily and Payal and Chandler, and ask some pretty, targeted questions about specific situations that I think will be very helpful to, we all kind of, we know the broad stuff, we know the broad challenges. And now I think we want to, dig into two things. I think first, Emily, you had talked about this merger and the struggle. And, as you went into this challenging alignment, how did you manage merging organizations?
Yeah. Thanks. I think that's like the topic right there is like, how do you do this? We all agree maybe that we should be doing this, but how do you do this? And I I can't take credit for the idea of the merger or the hard work that went into it because my daughter was diagnosed really as the merger had already started. And so my role was more so kind of taking the new creation of what was merged together and taking that forward. But I think that's just as important too, because you're looking back to the history and you're making sure that those original missions are still carried through, but together. So that's kind of been my focus as the president of CTN-NB1 Connect and Cure is kind of learning the history and learning the community, and then making sure that we are all together moving forward in alignment.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of an important point when we're talking about that mindset and the alignment and the history of it. And it's important, but I think one of the things that, we can get stuck in is it is evolution. Sometimes now, the core missions, the core pillars, but how we get there, methodologies, people involved, it all evolves. And that's kind of, if I'm hearing correctly, sometimes where you can get stuck in those that do not want to evolve as well.
Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
you cannot just take everything forward. You have to, really create a new thing and move that forward using the community as the guide. And I think that's the key point for us has been really tapping into the voice of the community. What do they need? What do they want? And using that to make sure we're aligned. And I think that's the easiest way to look at it too, is, you're not trying to steer this ship out of thin air. You're really taking the patient voice and putting that into everything you're doing.
Absolutely. Listening, but if we're fighting for something, we better make sure that we're fighting for the right thing. And what people really could benefit from. And I think, Payal, that kind of parlays right into you with the struggles of, or the struggles and you actually went to merge two organizations, correct?
Right. So, factions really result from not listening, to the needs of your communities, as Emily just said. And so part of it was I was driven to start my own organization because I kind of felt, that the original founders were not listening to the resources or the ideas that I was bringing to the table. However, we both quickly realized when there were two different foundations working with a very small subset of population that we were essentially in competition with each other. We were competing, for, our communities, fundraising, opportunities that any came up. We were competing for them to sign up for different, any and all lists that we were trying to create, so we were competing for every aspect. And it was just, everybody was confused. The community was confused. They didn't know who was doing what and what research was important. And that was not a good feeling as a leader. And the vision I had when I started, my own foundation in the first place. So it was really important to, try to find that bridge and connect that bridge with each other and say, I think it is going to be better if we, get in a room and just, discuss all the issues that we had and the reason we split in the first place and see if we can come together. And, ultimately, you really have to try to put your ego aside, even if you were the founder of an organization, if you're trying to collaborate and bring everybody to the table to see if we can make this work. We were very successful in doing that with our organizations, and we have been merged for a year and a half, and I can tell you that it is 100% times way better now. Reflecting back, I'm glad we pushed for the merger on both ends. It was not just a one-way street from my end. And I'm glad that as a community, our community sees the efforts that went into it, the rebranding, and now it's a clear mission and it's a clear like voice, you know, and no, and new parents coming in, you know, are not confused on why there's one or two or three organizations and why are we all competing for the same data and asking them to do the same things over and over again, essentially.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I can certainly share that sentiment, you know, even though we're in these rare disease communities, there's still differences. There's different forms, there's different degrees. And, you know, I kind of, in ours, there's a dominant, in osteopetrosis, there's a dominant form and a recessive form. And they're two very different things. It's babies and live human beings and adults. And, you know, I kind of related a little bit to cancer. You know, it's very difficult to put a breast cancer patient in with, you know, a melanoma. You're just going to have two very different experiences. And that transparency that you're talking about, Payal, just, you know, let's put it all out on the table. What does everybody want? Where is everybody going with this? You know, what is your end goal? And being clear on that, like you were talking about. Chandler, I'm super interested to know, you know, as coming in as the kind of the newbie, your experiences in trying to get that voice heard.
So I feel like my story, and I know we've said this in our, you know, meetings beforehand, it kind of, you know, goes along very similarly to Payel's, but also a little bit of like, you know, maybe she turned right, but then I turned left when we got to like, you know, a stoplight. Like I mentioned earlier, I started my organization in 2018, but it is not the first organization dedicated to my condition. There's an organization that has been around in the US for 60 plus years now. However, what's different is with achondroplasia, there only within the past decade has research really evolved and really started happening. And the organization that's been around was not really did not want to focus on being I would say, research focused organization. However, that was developing, I would say, a void in the community for, you know, parents of children with my condition. I want to say 80% of those with achondroplasia are born to parents without the condition. And so a big, you know, number are parents who are not familiar with the condition at all. And so once, you know, within the past decade, all new parents who are having a child with achondroplasia, they're looking into the new research and the only FDA approved treatment that's on the market right now. And the other organization that's been around for 60 plus years did not want to be, you know, it was not a goal of theirs to be so involved in research because they don't necessarily, you know, see this as a condition that necessarily needs a pharmaceutical treatment. I'm not going to dive into all of, you know, that kind of, you know, compare and contrast, but that's why I was inspired to start my own organization. I, as a patient, had been sharing my own experience living with the condition for years while going through some orthopedic procedures. And that is how I kind of already initially started developing relationships with parents. And then what really truly inspired me to start my organization, because I saw that more and more parents were leaning on me just as an individual, as a resource, and thought to myself, I can do so much more with this if I, you know, started a patient advocacy group that could really help to support research and what have you. And so that's why I started the Chandler Project. Our organization, you know, like I've said, is very focused on research. And it's why I, as an organization, rely so heavily on global genes. I have said time and time again in global gene meetings and outside of global gene meetings, my organization would not be what it is without global genes at all. So I just want to say that. But you know, in a perfect world, yes, I think it would be great if there was kind of like this one-stop shop organization for all, you know, for all rare diseases. However, within the achondroplasia, skeletal dysplasia community, I think it works better right now that we have a multiple of organizations that each one kind of has its own niche and caters, to a specific, target. Like the Chandler Project, we're very focused on research and advocacy, and there's other organizations that are much more involved on community and just, finding that network and finding your healthcare team. And so, to be that research focused organization is definitely something I take, a lot of pride in. And all of the organizations, at least within the US, we come together and we do work together. We come together in different ad board meetings, but it's definitely, there's definitely things we probably don't agree on from time to time, but I still think it's important that, at the end of the day, our community as a whole is all one community and that we're able to, fill the void that maybe the other organization doesn't have or doesn't quite focus on. And so I think that's just the beauty of having more than one PhD per, per condition or per, sub condition when it comes to rare diseases.
That's awesome, Chandler. And I think it kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, it's okay to be different. It's okay not to walk down the exact same path as the established organization, but that collaboration is still so valuable. And, we don't live in a perfect world. We kind of all know that. We all know how this is run. It's run by human beings. It's run by humans that, want it, enjoy having the whole gamut. And if you're noticing, I just applaud you, all of us that, you notice there's a need that's not being met. Ours was the cord blood donation. And we very, very specifically did cord blood because it is applicable to anybody with any disease that cord blood can treat. So it wasn't just, so I kind of parlayed that out because it was becoming difficult. And the support still stayed there for the moms, which is where you found the infantile diagnosis. And so you piecemeal it together, if you will. But definitely, I just love that, it is important to still be at the same table and to invite other organizations into yours and welcome, information that's being shared with you. And you just take it as food for whatever you got, whatever you need, Payal, this actually is for Chandler. You just kind of answered this about why you started, what gave your passion to start your foundation. And certainly if you have something else, absolutely add it in, but I think it kind of did. So Payal, what about you?
My passion was always the center of, I wanted more research done on the disease for my daughter. And, we've discussed, the four of us have discussed in the past too. And I recognized when I came in to the first call, I even told, Chandler, I understand that there are organizations that are so huge that now there's, there probably is a need to have multiple PAGs, for that, or, for that particular rare disease. But for us, we were just so small, and we are still so small, right? We're only 200 people worldwide. So, while I recognize that I wanted more research, and more focused, maybe, because research is advancing at a really fast pace and wanted a treatment, possibly, in a few years, which is happening more and more. I also recognize that our community, some of them were there simply for support, like community support. So what I want to take away from this is when we are trying to build, bridge the gap between two organizations, is that you have to listen to every single person, right? Every new family. And that new family that comes in may not necessarily have the same ideas as you as a founder. And Emily and I have talked about this, and we oftentimes get, hold up, and I'm pretty sure Emily can define founder syndrome very well because she came in after the fact, right? But a founder syndrome is very much a real thing in terms of it's because you started the organization, you kind of, held up on the fact that this is my vision and that's what it's going to be. And you kind of have to look at your community, you have to look at what everybody wants, and realize that you may have founder syndrome and it might be time for you to step back. So essentially, and then I, I understand that there are certain rare diseases that it's absolutely necessary to have 2, 3, or even more PAGs, right, with different focuses. But I also recognize that, we have to do everything kind of collaboratively where everybody has an equal voice, particularly at the table when you're talking to pharma or researchers or any industry, because nobody likes a divided community. Nobody wants to work with a divided community.
I
Absolutely.
think that's the important point, is that nobody wants to work with battling communities and divided.
Hey, Sarah, there was a question and a kind of a comment. This is Nicole, that I just thought was really relevant to what you guys were talking about, if you don't mind me just like answering it. So one of the questions was, comments was, I don't know that this session is intended to say everyone needs to merge, because that's not realistic, right? But so there's two things. One, it would be very interesting, Payal, and everyone to comment, like, what if that other person, like, you came to a place where you said, this is really hard, I need to change my approach, and I think we should merge. What if the other person or the other organization didn't want to? Like, how would that have changed your approach? Like, you lucked out, kind of, right? And the second was for someone, and please chime in, because now that I'm not looking at the chat, I can't remember where it was from, but they said that there was a lot of different organizations in their community, and in order to address that, they created like a global leadership council within kind of their disease area, because knowing that everyone, right, has their own goals and objectives, but it creates kind of a safe place for everyone to share ideas and collaborate, right? So two kind of distinct questions, but just, interested to hear your thoughts on the first, because not everyone has willing partners, even though it's the right thing. And then the second, these different ideas of how people can collaborate, I think, when merging is not the right option.
But I'm happy to chime in on, what if, and just answer the basic. If they're not willing to listen or bring to the table, you constantly have to find smaller projects, at least in my idea, to collaborate with first. Start with something small that you agree on. Maybe it's a fundraising, maybe it's, a small research project that you both want to do, and say, we'll fundraise together for this project and see how it goes. And then then try to, hold that olive branch and be like, okay, let's talk about merger now that we've successfully, collaborated on one project, and look how well we work, that's, taking it a little step at a time is how you kind of try to work with somebody who's not willing to work with you.
And I think to that point as well, and there's the reality of the situation is sometimes you just have to say bye. If it is not, if they are not going to collaborate, how much energy are you going to expend into trying to make someone else get on your train?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always open for, collaboration into any degree, but also, I'm very much, live by kind of the rule of, no is a full sentence. And if you've reached out and you've said, hey, do you want to do this? And they're just like, no, I'm like, all right, then I won't keep on pushing or pressuring. Sometimes you just gotta move on and do your own, thing, because it's like at the end of the day, community, the patients, all over are, I think the number one. Our organizations are not. It's like I want the, patients happy, and the parents of the patients are just, the community. And so it's like, if we, again, like many wish, so many of our organizations would collaborate, and sometimes we can, and sometimes there is that opportunity, but sometimes we're like, no, I'm gonna keep doing my thing, this organization's gonna keep doing their thing. It's better that we just do those things separately. And I think that's kind of, sometimes I think it's good to just be like, we're not open for collaboration at the moment. Like, I know that's kind of like opposite of what I feel like the point of this is, but it's like not everything I think needs collaboration. And I think it's better even for our own, mental health, just be like, all right, if we know what this is not something we can work on or need to work on together, then it's best to just, do our own things.
I think that's absolutely spot on, Chandler. And especially, like you said, at this moment, it doesn't mean that there's not a collaboration in the future, but
Absolutely. There's so
yeah.
many, we have collaborated, the Chandler Project has collaborated. We have been brought to the same table as the other organizations on so many wonderful, incredible projects that we have developed for the community as a whole. And we work well together. But there are some instances where it's just like, that's not something we need to be working on together because we just have, our views are too different, or, it's just, that's just how it is.
Emily.
Yeah, I was just going to add to your point, I think agreement is a win. Just talking and being transparent about, this is what we're focused on. Is there an area that we can, a project we can work on together? And, maybe it's staying in your own lane, like, hey, we've got this covered, you're covering this, we're not going to duplicate efforts. So having that open line of communication, even if it's not, both working together on a project, can be a huge win as well. But back to, founder syndrome, I think I am, like Payal said, in a unique position to kind of outsider looking in at all of these founders, these wonderful founders that I've met. And, leading the organization for a year and a half now myself, I can certainly feel the urge of the ownership, and you pour your blood, sweat, and tears into this thing, and it's almost a product of your worth. It feels your human nature is so personally attached to the mission and the effort you've put into it. I feel that even not as a founder, but I certainly recognize the founders that I've met, that struggle of what went into starting this thing, and how do you open up the table to the new voices, and how do you keep an open mind to that evolution that's so necessary when you're representing a patient community. So yeah, I applaud all the founders, but to, I guess hot take, like, please, reflect on your community's needs and kind of check yourself as far as your motives, and make sure you're really, really looking to the community to lead you and not the other way around.
And in parallel to that founder syndrome, I want to say that board fatigue is also a thing. So you may be in that leadership role and not realize that you may have, board fatigue of doing this for years and years. And that's why you're, alienating yourself essentially from a subset of population, because you are just not open to, hear the new ideas that are coming in. And so if you're saying something, Sarah, I can't hear you.
Oh, no. I was gonna say, and I think where that hits really well is there's a lot of emotion in this. There's a lot of personal emotion. It is not just a business to anybody that is involved in rare disease advocacy. So remembering that for myself, 10, 12 years into it, really realizing that yes, I was doing it for the bigger good, but this was something that was so emotionally necessary for me to make sense of what had happened, what was going on. And like this, when you're not able to differentiate the two, it's that reflection, Emily, that, okay, what was the driving force between starting this and where I'm at now? Mason's 16, he didn't want to have anything to do with this. So it's not for him. And recognizing that and being okay with that and saying, okay, you know what? Again, this is where the need is now. And being able to step back is such a skill set as a leader to understand.
Is recognizing that, you probably need to take a step back as a leader of your organization is one of the hardest things to do, especially if you're a founder. And recognizing that there may be, a newer, family, a newer person who is now listened to the two original founders, or and is willing to run with it, is important. So I agree with what you said, is that it may have started with another drive and passion, and subsequently over the years, it's turned into, who am I really doing this for, right? Is it for me, and or is it, why did I start this in the first place?
And is it my ego making these decisions? Is it my ego what's fighting everybody on making any changes or evolving? And to Chandler's point, science is just continuously evolving. And so it's a natural progression if we start to identify. When Mason was transplanted in 2009, that was experimental at the time, and fortunately now it's pretty standard. But not knowing that, and if we were just stuck on, the community and all of that, not understanding how this one form of treatment could be so beneficial to so many people, we would have been stuck in our own way.
This is Nicole again. I'm just going to share that, get your feedback on this. We had someone say that in regards to like founder syndrome, that the owners of the not-for-profit are the public and the community, not the individual. And if we could all own up to that, that would be better. And then there's another suggestion about creating a community code of kindness between a variety of organizations. And it sounds, I haven't looked into it yet, but I can't wait, because it's about, I would assume, right? Everyone has their feelings about how to support their kids. And so how can we create a way to engage that respects each other? So I didn't know if you guys had any feedback. There's a lot of great comments and suggestions that are popping up in the chat.
Yeah. I definitely think that kindness, we all are coming from this place of fear. And fear can create these emotions that become very defensive and very offensive. And, I'm just a huge advocate of putting it as transparency, honesty, and putting everything out on the table. That is to me, that's the only way to move forward. If we're holding back on how we feel about something, what our emotion is, or, are we on board or aren't we on board? We're not speaking our mind because we're fearful. If we're at a table, and I know Chandler can speak to this as well, where we're the smallest voice.
Mhm.
We need to, how are we going to get them to listen to us? And it sometimes is not always going to be done that way. And people get very territorial about their money as well. We know that. So it's that acceptance, is this a competitive world? Absolutely. Absolutely. If we accept that, and that's how we move forward, all right, I'm not here to compete with you.
Mhm.
I'm here, if we diffuse that, if I'm not in competition, who are you competing to?
Yeah, what kind of on, that note, what I think something that organizations can, I think sometimes we can maybe become a little bit territorial over our community, but at the end of the day, we want, our community is relying on all of our organizations. And like I said earlier, all of our organizations are brought together. I would say we don't necessarily all come together to the same table as our own. We usually come to the same table when we're invited by industry partners. That's typically, when we come together, it's because we're being invited. I don't think, have truly come together ourselves. And so, like I mentioned, when I started the Chandler Project, it was because, more and more research was evolving around achondroplasia. And of course, because, with that, we're getting invited from pharmaceutical companies to come together for ad boards and what have you. And so I think, when what I have experienced as an organization and some other organizations, in comparison with the long-standing organization, is something that we have kind of felt like, you know, and I don't want to speak on behalf of these other organizations, so I'll speak on behalf of myself. But sometimes, you know, I feel, you know, my organization definitely better aligns in terms of, you know, being so research focused. And that, you know, is something you would think would really draw these research companies. However, because there's been this organization around for this community for 60 plus years, sometimes when we're at the same table, it's almost like there's this, you know, seniority that they have. They kind of almost have this upper hand in a sense, you know, we all at the end of the day kind of want to make sure we're not stepping on their toes because they've been around longer than I've even been alive. And I do think, you know, in order for us to kind of create a better balance in these board meetings, that it's, you know, essential that we establish clear, you know, rules and prioritize, excuse me, you know, equity over seniority. Because, you know, even though a few years ago I was the newbie, my organization was the newbie in the space, I still have this condition and still cater to these families just as much as, you know, the other organization did. And, you know, I don't think just because they've been around for longer, they should always kind of have that, you know, be given, you know, the upper hand. And, you know, at the end of the day, when they're asking, when companies, research companies are asking for all of our input, there have been times where I felt, you know, they side or they take they take more into consideration that company, the organization that's been around longer, because it's like seniority, and it's almost like seniority rule at the end of the day. And, you know, that has been definitely a big conflict, and I've expressed it and have, you know, with another friend of mine who also has a patient advocacy group that, you know, very aligns a lot with mine. She and I have both been like, you know, we're here and we, you know, our organization aligns so much more with what these companies are doing, but they don't want to ruin or hurt that relationship with the organization that's kind of has that seniority. And so it's like, even though they're bringing us together for collaboration, it's still almost like they want to honor that organization's legacy more, because it's like they've been around longer. And that's definitely a huge conflict that has been, I would say, an issue or just a conflict the past few years. But I think, you know, we're trying, you know, to work with that. But I know that's something we have talked about, you know, discussing in this
Yeah,
today.
absolutely. And you know, we're rare. We kind of have to break free from those societal norms and go against the grain and maybe, you know, do things a little outside the box. Thank you guys so much. I think we are absolutely gonna get to some of these questions that are in the chat.
Just gonna say that there's a lot of questions in the chat.
Yep, so we want to make sure that we get to that so that we're hitting topics.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. This is Charlene Sun-Rigby, and I have been absolutely engrossed in the discussion today. Thank you all for you know, for sharing your wisdom and your, you know, your hard-won experiences. So why I know that we're not going to be able to get to every question because we want to also have some time for the breakouts, but one of the questions that came up is, how do you reconcile competition for funding? And I'll just, you know, there has been a lot of discussion about competition, a little bit of discussion on fundraising. So I wanted to open that question up to y'all, and maybe I'll add a little bit to it around, is there a way to turn, you know, to make the pie bigger? Like, are there ways to turn from competition to, you know, really, you know, doing something bigger together? So you can answer either side of that question.
So, I mean, that's one of the biggest reasons that I think both of our organizations came together, is we realized that we were literally competing for that fundraising pie. There are only so many new families that are coming in, right? And there's only so many people that have the capacity to fundraise for a certain project or not. And then you're competing with the other organization saying, okay, well, this project is worth fundraising for versus my project is worth fundraising for. And then that's where you're now dividing the community further. And so that's probably one of the biggest reasons I recognized that this was not working for our two organizations is that we were competing for not only the fundraising dollars, but also to, with researchers. We were essentially spending valuable fundraised dollars on maybe similar projects. And it made no sense because now you have taken, you only have certain amount of fundraised dollars that you have to begin with. And if you're putting it in the same pie, right, like with two different researchers, it may not, result in, focusing on doing different projects that you necessarily can address, every single person in the community. So recognizing that competition is not good, right? And coming to the table and saying, if we collaborated together, because you may have a family that goes, I'm not going to fundraise for either of these organizations. I'm just not going to do it. And that's how you grow the pie bigger, right? I don't know which research project is better. I don't know which makes sense for us. It's probably best to just stay out of this. And we've seen that, right? Like we've seen that once we've come together, that we have more families engaged and more families now wanting to fundraise and wanting to step up.
Yeah, I think of it really, I talk a lot about how there's a virtuous circle that we're trying to create, right? Around trust, engagement, and then, hopefully funding. And the clearer that the messaging is and the less confusing and fewer, and I'll call them distractions, but, situations where people aren't clear on why they should do one thing or the other, I think can really make a big difference. Sarah.
No, I mean, clarity on what your ultimate goal is, because when we're scattered, and I hear this all the time from my publisher, like when you're wanting to help everybody, you help nobody. And, and so you just want to make sure that you get your full purpose. And I'm always a big promoter of thinking outside the box. We're thinking funding, we're thinking dollars. I did my entire cord blood program, $750,000 a year program, completely pro bono. Meaning there was no liquid, there was no dollars, it was donated time, hospital units. So yes, there was money attached to it, but it wasn't this quintessential dollars. So always keep thinking, okay, what is my end goal? How do I want to get there? Who can I pull in? Who's on board that we can get this quote unquote service in place, but maybe it doesn't have to be a financial transaction. And just continuing those thoughts. So yes, that competition. And like you said, if you're going for these dollars and it's two competing things, it will ultimately end up falling through, So that's just my thought on it.
Thank you. There's a number of questions that have come up in the chat as well as in the Q&A, and I think that they on the face of them, they seem a little bit kind of orthogonal to this discussion, but we have been talking about founders syndrome, and overall one of the key things that we're doing in this advocacy exchange is about leadership. And so there's a couple of questions I'll bring together. One of them is around, how do you identify and vet possible board members? And I'll expand that a little bit to say, people who are going to be arm in arm with you, to help you to drive forward your, mission. And then, I think that generally also there's a question about leadership skills, that people think need to be developed. So I'll open things up, and maybe I'll ask if Chandler or Emily want to go first.
Yeah, I'll chime in first. Only because part of like creating this new thing that I was mentioning was kind of looking out and recruiting of who was also had that mindset of let's move forward together. And so we have onboarded four new board members since I became president. And these are people, just personally speaking, things that I was looking for were people that were very entrenched in the community and could be that liaison and, disseminate information back and forth and make sure the community voice was in the room. in every decision that we were making. So for me, that was top priority, was people who were prioritizing the community's voice, and letting that lead us. And then dependability. I mean, we talk about evolution and, burnout and all of that. I think it's important to recognize that when you're bringing on somebody, it might not be a long-standing thing, and that's okay. You have to think about succession planning and how you're going to be able to keep moving forward sustainably when people need to tap out, and tap back in maybe. So kind of having that fluid evolution has been really important, in what I've seen.
Great. Thank y'all so much. I know we didn't get into nearly all the questions, but we're not done. We've got lots of opportunity for you to join a breakout room, which is when we're going to break into smaller groups. Each of our amazing panelists and some of the Global Genes team are going to be in these groups where you can ask some questions that are kind of more specific to one area or another that we've talked about. So the breakout rooms that you will have the opportunity to go to are, Emily is going to be talking about how does it work post-merger. Payal, you can select room 2 to talk about how do you merge despite conflicts. So if you're thinking about that vein, then maybe you want to pick one of those rooms. If you're like a lot of us are probably thinking about continuing to work in parallel, what does that look like? So if you're non-merged and you're going to work together, how do you navigate that? Chandler's going to talk about that with a group. And then Sarah will be talking about knowing your mindset, being honest about your goals, and all things kind of mindset there. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. We hope that the breakout rooms were really exciting and you got to have more conversation about these topics that you chose to go in. We're going to be sharing the recording from this, and just wanted to share a few resources from Global Genes, from other partners, and things. These will be included in the emails that you receive after this survey, but there's a lot of other resources out there besides the amazing content that we've experienced today. Collaboration among foundations, there's podcasts, there's other websites, and some other things that are similar but different topics, working nicely in the same sandbox. And it's really all of us against the disease, which I think is the overarching theme that we've kind of talked about today. We hope that you will come back again. We have another session that Charlene Sung-Rigby, our CEO, who you also got to talk to a little bit today, is going to be leading. Charlene, did you want to share a little bit about what we'll be discussing in June?
Thanks, Lauren. Yes, we will be talking about interacting with the FDA, an incredibly important set of interactions for driving forward regulatory progress in rare disease therapeutics. And we'll be joined by Larry Bauer, who was previously at the FDA and now at Hyman Phelps, Robin Bent, who is at the FDA and manages the patient-focused drug development program, and Dorothea Lands from the Prader-Willi Syndrome Association, and she'll be able to talk about their experience through that process.
Wonderful. It's going to be and it looks like Michael McGinn said they have their PFDD in August. So it's very, very timely. And we hope that that will be a really great resource for you all. So again, this is part of a year-long series. There's lots of opportunities as we continue. But thank you to our sponsors. Again, we could not do this without them. As I mentioned before, you'll all receive a post-session survey after this. And we want to hear your experiences. What hit home? What do you want more of? What's your feedback? What did you take away? We want to help understand how this helped you in the work that you're doing, and then help identify future educational needs. So again, thank you so much for coming. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time.